father of heavy metal guitar, Tony Iommi, is using digital amp simulations. It's a brave new world we have out there. And man, this article is really something. This should get people really talking, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But Tony Iommi's quote is quite incredible. He says, "The sound quality is incredible. It can be quite hard to tell the difference between the Kemper and a real amp." Tony Iommi has been experimenting with digital amp modelers, and he's used one to record new material. Now, he's talking about the Kemper. The Kemper is one of the grandfathers now of modeling. I mean, it's one of the old units that, is not maybe considered as cutting edge as some of the ones out there, but it is still a very good unit. And, when I've been trying a lot of different modelers and different things here on my channel. The Nano Cortex, I've done a video on that, and the UA Lion, done that, and the UA, all these different, the Pod Express, I've done the Kemper Profiler Player. Now, I was a guy about 13 years ago when I got off the road. I was a guy and I had been threatening while I was on the road to switch to a Kemper. And I'll tell you why. So I was a guy out on the road with a huge rack with 300 watt amp heads in it, and an amp switcher, and a voltometer to tell me how many volts were coming into the club or stadium or arena that we were playing at that time. And I was fully a tube guy from the core. I had been a tube amp guy since I was a little kid. My first tube amp was a little Harmony tube amp, and that thing, man, you would crank it all the way up and just get the most incredible kind of tweed-like distortion out of it. And man, I'd been a tube amp guy all my life. In a perfect world, in a perfect situation, I would use a tube amp every time. But the reality is the world we live in. I live in a home. I have my daughter's room in the next room next door, and I cannot crank up a tube amp in this room, in a modern day, house with a family. It's just not an option. But, 13 years ago, when I got off the road, and, I've been threatening on the road to use a Kemper because, man, the maintenance of the tube amps on the road, the fact that every night, because I didn't have a brown box, and I would notice that the voltage in every venue would be different. And on some nights, it would make my amp sound great. And then on other nights, when the voltage would be, too hot, it would make the amp sound stiff and just harsh sounding. But, sort of that natural variac thing, when the voltage would be below, the standard number, I think it's, 120 or 124, 120, something like that. When it would be lower than that, I'd get that squish to it, that compression to it, and it would sound awesome and feel awesome, and I would have a great show because the amp is allowing me to do what I want to do. But some nights, man, I would just have to be like a bull in the china shop and just play through it. Its amp's not sounding good tonight, but man, I'm just gonna have to play through it. And so I had experienced using tube amps on the road and how costly they were, but also, think of having these huge amp lids that I would have to, every night we would have to cap our gear. We didn't have roadies out on the road. We had help with people who would roll the gear onto the truck. But every night I'd have to take these, like 40-pound lids and mount them on the thing and do this and it was like, man, the sooner you could get your gear capped, the quicker you could get to the after party. And so it was all about the after party when I was on the road. So I started thinking, man, if I just had a Kemper out here, I'd have this little thing and I could just, pick it up with one hand and boom, save me another step. And man, I was always threatening to go to a Kemper. But the reality is, I didn't, because I am a tube purist. But when I got off the road and I got in my house and I needed to record guitars and I wanted to improve my guitar tone and I couldn't, once again, I was in a regular house and I just couldn't, crank up my tube amps in there at the volume needed to get the tone that I needed. I purchased a Kemper, and I had been using a Kemper since about, 2013, 2014 at home doing my, recordings, whether it was, if you listen to the Stone Padre album, that is, I would say, 85% Kemper. I did use a Friedman, what was it, Little Sister or whatever it's called, Buxom Betty or whatever. I forget what the name of that amp was. I did mic an amp up for a song or two, but I used the Kemper for the rest of that album. And it's just ease of getting a guitar tone quick. It's not always easy when you mic up an amp, and you've got to find the sweet spot on the cone and all of those things. It's not always easy. But hearing that this legend is using a digital amp in the studio, and it's really it's just ease of use and quick. It's so quick to dial up a tone. I can remember doing albums at people's places, and I don't have cartage. I'm not like some big guy that keeps all his amps at SIR and just calls, hey, I need my amps at this location. And so if I had to do a session where I needed multiple guitar tones, I would be loading up my compact car with the 212, closed back cab and several amp heads and a couple of combo amps and then all my pedal boards. And then you got to get guitars in there. So I would literally have this, like a Honda Civic jammed with all this gear. And then I would have to go, to the gig, to the, session of the studio and take all that stuff. And then they'd have to mic each one up. And then we'd have to, each mic you'd have to check and, and it would take hours and all of that lifting and all of that stuff. But the thing, with a Kemper or some kind of modeling is it's literally just click. Oh, I'm going to need a Fender clean tone. Click. Whereas before it's like, oh, well, I got a deluxe reverb in my trunk. Let me pull that out and let's mic that up. Oh, it's not working today. Oh man, what are we going to do? That's the other thing. You could have an amp and you test it at home and it sounds great and everything's cool. And then you get to the session and you flick the power switch on and it could be completely dead, or it could all of a sudden smoke could come pouring out of it. I've had that where amps were just sounding incredible and all of a sudden they call it the magic smoke. The magic smoke just pours out of it because the filter caps decided today was the day that they were just going to quit working. It can be very difficult to get tube amps and maintain them. I've still got a couple here at the house. And if I ever decide to start, playing live again, depending on the situation, I might pull out the tube amps. Or if there's a recording session and it's an old school thing, then I'll pull out my tube amps. But the reality is, man, if I'm recording at the house, I'm using a Kemper, or I'm using a modeler, or I'm using, some kind of simulation just for ease of use, just for the fact that I can get a great tone quick and make it work. Now, let me tell you something. I did some recording with the legendary producer, Michael Wagener. He produced everybody from Metallica to Dokken to Skid Row to Extreme to all these amazing, amazing guitar tones. And I remember one time we were recording a version of Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones for some kind of like a jingle session or something. And we were doing it, and he wasn't doing anything. And he said, "What are you guys doing today?" "Oh, well, we need to record this Blitzkrieg bop." He says, "Well, I'm not doing anything today. Come on over." And so I brought, because I didn't want to fill my car with all my stuff, and I knew I just needed a quick, and this was a quick thing. He was doing this as a favor for us. I brought my original. This was the days of the kidney bean pod. And I brought my little pod, and we plugged it in, and I hit the plexi setting or whatever, and figured that was probably what the Ramones sound was. And, he kind of snubbed his nose at it, and he had amps and stuff over that. But man, this was something we just wanted to get quick. It's the Ramones. It's not Eric Johnson. It's not Van Halen. It's the Ramones. So, he kind of like, pod, okay, well, I'll make it work, and he did some trickery and some EQ and ran it through some of his really awesome pre's, and we got it to sound good. But later, when the Kemper came out, I was surprised because Michael Wagener had a whole cavalcade of amps, guitars, all of this analog gear. He is the guy that, yes, he recorded in digital. Yes, he used Pro Tools, but man, he was a guy that very much loved tube amps and classic guitar tones and all that. But when the Kemper came along and he was able to, record his tube amp and then put it side by side with the tones of the Kemper, he realized, man, this capturing process is really something else. And so here's a guy who had used on all those major albums, had used his tube amps and he had Soldanos, he had Marshalls, he had Randall, he had the old ADA. Like, wasn't he the guy that had a lot of guys using the ADA preamp? He had all of these things still in his studio. He had an amazing collection of gear. But when the Kemper came along, he was proud to put that. I think he had 2 or 3 of them. And he even put out a Kemper Profiler pack, a Michael Wagener pack that had a lot of his iconic amps that he had in his studio. And man, the thing is, if it didn't sound right, if he wasn't realizing that when I A/B these 2 sounds, and it's the same amp, the profile, and then the real amp, the profile, and he can switch back and forth right on his console, and he hears it and realizes, man, this is a really valuable thing, because artists that need to play live, they can use their tube amp on the record, but then profile it and take that exact tone out on the road. That is a very valuable thing, because men, more and more people want to sound like the record. The way, live music is today, they want to sound like the record. And I had these friends that were out on the road, and they had these huge amp racks with all these things, trying to get all these different era tones of these bands that they were playing live with. And I know they switched to the fractal unit because they could basically emulate all of those different sounds. And that one rack space could eliminate an entire rack of gear. It comes down to ease of use. And I know I'm going to get tons of comments of people saying it, modelers and profilers, they sound like crap. Let me know what you think in the comments. But man, when it comes down to maintaining the gear and having it work every night, sometimes it's just better and easier to go the digital route. Let me know what you think in the comments. And thanks so much for watching.